Welcome to Darklaw Dominion, where we dive deep into the shadows, the darkest parts of ourselves that we rarely speak of, yet we all feel. I'm your host, Dominion, and in this series, we're not afraid to face the raw truths of our mental health, the battles that rage within, and the weight we carry when no one else is watching. This is where we confront the fears, the pain, the trauma we hide, and uncover the power that lies within the darkness. Because only by facing it can we truly heal and rise. Let's take this journey together. Welcome to the depths of Darklaw Dominion.
Good afternoon, and welcome to the Create Dominion podcast with your host, Dominion, and welcome to episode 11 of the wonderful season 2 of the Darklaw Dominion mental health series. I'm joined from New Jersey, the wonderful state of New Jersey, by Mrs. Katie, and she's going to talk about addiction and the professional fortitude of helping individuals overcome addiction. So we've got a very jam-packed episode 11 for you all here today. And so before we get into that, I'm going to let Katie introduce herself. How are you, Katie?
I am good. Thank you for having me. So my name is Katie Onitiri-Hageman, and I live in New Jersey, have been for the last 15, 20 years. I'm originally from Illinois. I went to school in Indiana. So I'm a Midwest girl by heart. So I've been in New Jersey, and I guess you want to know my background. So I'm a psychotherapist, licensed marriage family therapist, as well as drug and alcohol addictions counselor. I have a certification in supervision, and I am EMDR trained.
Awesome, awesome. And so I know you guys are listening and like, wow, she just went through a whole, PhD, master's and doctoral and all these different acronyms and just different things. And so I know you guys, some of you guys are listening like, okay, what are we going to talk about? And so we're going to talk about different forms of addiction and how she helps individuals overcome. And so, just on that, there are very many forms of addiction. You have it could be something tangible like gambling, drugs, alcohol, pornography. But it could also be different things that you may not think are addiction. It could be maybe your TV habits, maybe some of the things that are good that are an addiction. Maybe it's going to the gym too much, or maybe you're overexerting yourself. And so, some of those things that in moderation we kind of look at as like, oh wow, you're working out, you're doing a good job. Those can also be a form of addiction, or some kind of psychological addiction is, the need for approval of others, right? Or the thought of needing that instant gratification, that dopamine that social media provides for all of us. And so there's many forms of addiction. And so Katie's got a very, very cast a wide net. She helps a lot of people. And so really for this episode, really just encourage everyone to, as we're listening, take one thing that's said here today that you can apply daily to your life and help someone else along the way. And so with that being said, let's go ahead and hop into this wonderful episode with Katie. And so my first question for you, Katie, is, what motivated you the most to really start the framework on becoming distinguished in your profession?
Yeah. So, Dominion, thank you for bringing me back because I liked how you said that I gave you all this pedigree about my license, and forgetting that I'm talking to people who may not even understand what that means. So, I do want to break that down as I go into your question. So, the field of helping people, counseling, and those credentials. So, what that really means is that I help people. When I say licensed marriage family therapist, it's really that I have an insight in a person, but in how their relation to others. And so it does not always have to be about marriage, but we do bring up relationship issues. And that aligns with me and going to get my specialization in addictions as well as trauma, because people we deal with addiction, and sometimes it's really generational. So that is how I started my career. So going back, I'm from a big family. I have about 13 siblings or so, with my mother and my father combined. And my mother comes from a big family. So just paying attention to generational patterns, and then working in a criminal justice system where you see the disparities. People say it all the time that the justice system is not just. And I witnessed that early on in my career. And I was very unsure of where I wanted to go. So I had a bachelor's degree and I was working in a court, Trenton, New Jersey's court system. And I worked for the prosecutor's office. So I was able to see a lot of discovery, a lot of evidence for people who were coming into the courtroom. And I saw how unjust the system was and how people really didn't have an idea of how to maneuver the system. They just knew that this is court and let me get out of this, and not really understand their rights or how the court system, the police really didn't have much on them. And so, unfortunately, I was on the municipal level, and it was a lot of like just small drug CDS charges or DUIs or domestic issues. And one thing I noticed that it was definitely family members who just the same behaviors, the same behaviors. So I eventually left there and went into a treatment center to work. And when I worked at the treatment center, it was a contract from the Department of Corrections. So they would take the prisoners who were reintegrating back into society who had an addiction issue. And my training, when we talk about addiction, is not just substances. Sometimes it's the behavior. And at the time, it was more of criminality in that type of work environment. So people who continue to do the same thing, continue to sell drugs despite the consequences, continue to, have that rush from the street life, right? Being in control, all the things that come with selling substances. So it wasn't just addiction to the substance as in taking it, but it was addiction to that lifestyle as well.
Awesome, awesome. I love how you broke that down and really, really commend you for, being a warrior out there and really helping people. And I love what you said about how you saw firsthand in the court system, like, wow, this guy really should be getting off, but, the lack of knowledge that people have. And, to me, y'all, it's just so powerful because we see the Law and Orders, you see the FBI, you see all these TV shows and, Judge. I know as a kid, I watched a lot of Judge Judy and Judge Mathis. And, you see the stuff in movies and TVs and you think that it's just a movie and television. But in reality, a lot of those, scenes and episodes stem from real cases and real events. They just, changed their names and, made it look more appealing to the eye just for media purposes. And so really love that you were able to see that firsthand. And I love, telling people as, just out in the marketplace of, once you experience something for yourself, then it kind of changes your perspective. And, I call it the confirmation bias. We all see those posts and the stories on social media or on the news and we scroll through. It's like, man, that person, he or she, that man or that woman's crazy, or I would never do that if I was in that situation, or how could they be so, it could be some of the worst things. It could be just something minuscule like that's dumb. Why would they ever do that? But like you said, until you're like sitting side by side or walking, locking arms with these people and really understanding the mindset and really seeing, how these people operate. I love what you said is, one of the quotes one of my mentors told me, when I was younger, and you've been saying it so far throughout the episode is, doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result is the definition of insanity. And I just remember my mentor, early 20s would, say that quote. And it's basically what you said, you related it to selling drugs in the street life. But again, like I said earlier at the start of the episode, it could be, any form of addiction, it could be weight loss. If you eat fast food every day and you go to the doctor and they say, hey, you got high blood pressure, diabetes, and, you're gonna, your kidney and livers are failing, and you eat McDonald's every day, if you leave the doctor's office and drive straight to the drive-through as soon as you leave the doctor's office, that's not gonna, the next visit, the next 3-month follow-up is gonna be the same. 90 days when you come back, you still eat McDonald's. They're going to say, hey, you got the same results or even worse. And so I really love that you broke that down by really highlighting that, hey, there's people out there, we're all human, but doing the same thing and expecting a different result is, the definition of insanity. And so I love that for you to break down like how you help individuals with a certain process, a certain thing in their mind. One of the things you said, no matter what the consequences are, they kept doing it. And so that's one of the questions I have for you, especially as a professional. How do you really sit down with folks and get them to see, the severity of the consequences and get them to kind of get that mental shift of, wow, this is how bad what my actions are affecting not just me for my consequences, but my family and those around me as well.
Yeah, so I love that you ask these questions because it's important because people who are suffering with addictions themselves, they don't even think they have a problem first. And that's big. And that's where it becomes an issue and impacts their daily living. So I do want to kind of go back to help define or for people to understand because addiction is with everyone, anyone. It does not matter color, it does not discriminate, it doesn't matter age. It affects millions of families, friends, and people in the community all the time, whether we realize it or not. But it has such a big stigma. Like, no one wants to be labeled as anything, but it's important that people recognize. So, education is big. So, that's the first thing. So, I never engage with a client from a professional level, right? So, working in this field, you never engage with an individual telling them that they have an addiction because they're not going to listen to you, right? So engagement is important. Being able to talk to someone as a person and not as their symptoms or to their symptoms, but more of to get them to buy in, to understand. Because sometimes a lot of people don't even know what's going on with them. They just know that life is hectic and they're so deep into whatever that they need education. So that's where I start. It's just talking to them, engaging with them, and getting them to know education. So one of the things that I want to inform everyone is that there's all different types of addictions, as you mentioned, right? But we do know about the substances. We know about alcohol. We know about prescription drugs. We know about heroin, cocaine, methamphetamine, nicotine, vaping products. Those are the things that we know. But there's also the behavioral things, as you mentioned before. So gambling. Gambling is even bigger now than ever because it's more accessible. Right now, is it NBA? Yeah, NBA games, right? So with that, people are easily going to gamble to guess who's going to win the game, right? People put money up, and now it's at your fingertip. Vendingo, help me out. What's the
Yeah,
gamble?
you got the FanDuel, you got the MGM Grant, yeah, you got all of them. DraftKings.
There you go. Yes. So with that, people may start with fun, but when you start winning and it's hitting, you getting that adrenaline rush and you're feeling the satisfaction, it's all good. But when you start losing, then you get in trouble, right? Because you start chasing and looking for different things. So gambling is one that you fall into an accident. Nobody is looking to lose money, right? But it's so common. It starts with lottery tickets. It may have been in your, when I say generation, it's something that may have been in the family all the time. Like, if you go back in the day, people used to run numbers, right? Go and play these numbers for me. So some of this stuff is generational, but it just changes with time. Things become different. Some of the things is cultural, like you do it in the family because this is what we do. We gonna play spades and we gonna put this money on the table, right? Still a form of gambling. Internet addiction. The more different things, like kids start off into the internet thing early on. They have their things like Roblox. They have arcade games. If you pay attention to an arcade game or arcade place, right? And you think about a casino, what is different? What's the same, right? So we start early on feeding different types of addiction and that we're not even aware. There's sex addiction, compulsive sexual behaviors that causes harm. There's shopping addiction, compulsive buying beyond needs, right? Amazon on it all the time. We get into it, buying beyond our needs. Do we really need? And then what are you doing with this stuff? Right? Excessive addiction, any type of impulsivity, emotional addiction. There's a such thing called love addiction, emotional love, where people are chasing that rush of drama, rush of chaos in a relationship. So we can go on and on and on. And I lost what your whole question was.
No, just oh well, you actually answered it, like just how you help people
Okay.
realize they're the problem. And so I love that you broke those down. Just back to the gambling thing, and the crazy thing is these websites and these FanDuels, they know that that dopamine, that rush is gonna hit you. If you win $1,000, well, the smart thing will do is be like, all right, cool, I hit my 1,000, it's $1,000 more in my account that I didn't have, that I would have had to work 40 plus that, or sometimes 2 weeks to even achieve. So most people would, all right, I'm off. But in the reality, they're banking on like, hey, if they get 1,000, well, instead of betting $5 per basketball game or per player to score a certain amount of points to get the butts, well, hey, I got $1,000. Let me do 100. Let me do 200. And so I actually had a good buddy of mine. He had hit, $800,000 on one bet off a basketball game, and he put another 500-600 into other bets and lost it all. And so you really walk away with $200-300 after all that's said and done. And those are the kind of things that they're, when it comes to gambling, they're banking on. And just like the spades and the shooting dice on the corner back in the day, and Russian roulette and blackjack and all these different things. I love that you said like kids getting on early. How many people have kids or nephews or nieces or people in the school system that are playing, Fortnite, Roblox, at 4 or 5, 6 years old. And as you get older, you start to get into school, and you go to high school and you're on the computer, and you go to college and now you have to be on the computer because all your classes are, you got to write reports and do projects on the computer. And then guess what happens? You get a real job, and you got to either, if you're at a factory, you got to scan a scanner. That's the computer. If you get into management, you got to be on the computer. If you are similar to yourself, you become a professional. Yeah, you're working with clients, but how do you do paperwork? You gotta get put in the file on the computer. You gotta, what do you use to book your appointments? You use your phone to book, so everything is technology, internet type driven. You can't do a lot of things without Wi-Fi nowadays. And we've all seen, if Facebook or social media goes down, an outage, or if your internet goes out and the power goes out, it's kind of like, what do we do? And everybody kind of like freaks out, like some of those movies. And I just love that you're breaking down, all these different forms of addiction. Because again, like some of the things like your porn and your internet are, those bigger things, and your drugs, but also, the smaller things. Like I love what you said, like love addiction, or, the feeling for need or chaos. And, we all have those people on their Facebook or in their family that they can't keep a woman, can't keep a man, or they always arguing, or why you always going through his phone? That's weird, that's toxic. And, we just can't understand, like, you always think he cheating, or you always think she, we all see those people. And I was talking about a lot in my domestic violence, episodes, or my dating and relationship series on Black Garden. But how many people in relationships, like, if they're out in public and the waiter or waitress or some guy smiles, or some girl got a nice short, skippery, short, curvy dress on. And, we all have that couple in our family there, or in our friends, that, hey, the one or the other can't even look that way, or can't even smile or give a compliment, because it's like, they gonna think we used to call it tripping. Like, why are you tripping? The waitress just smiled and said, "Have a good day, honey." You can't even have courtesy, with certain different aspects. And as people, we kind of look at that like, that's so weird. And just back to my original statement of confirmation bias, it really shapes how you think. If your first girlfriend was like that, or your first boyfriend was, they call it jealous or envious, and you couldn't go anywhere, couldn't have any. Another one is, you can't have friends of the opposite sex because they'll think you're cheating or doing something. If you start off with that, then that's all you know. That's gonna be how you shape all relationships to be. And so that's just, some of the things. And so I love for you to kind of break down, what are some other harmful effects that, or examples of what addiction does to those around you, or just does to you in general, that you feel maybe a lot of people maybe see but don't really speak on.
Yeah, so addiction is very deep. We don't even have time to really go into so much, but I do want to go back to really say, like, define it, I guess, so people can really understand what we're saying. I mean, we did talk about the different kinds, but I think it's important that people know that it's really the brain. Okay. So addiction, it impacts the brain. So it's always been debatable whether addiction is a disease or not. And I'm here to tell you from the field, I've been in this field now for about 20 years, and addiction is a disease. We can quickly go to the doctor and, be diagnosed with heart problems, and it can be heart disease. We can go to the doctor about, anything, and it can be diagnosed. But when it comes to addiction, it's all about the brain. Addiction impacts the brain. People do not want to be in their addiction once they're in it. but it's a part of the brain where you have to do a lot to break the addiction. And people are frequently judged and told, why can't you stop? Well, they can't because it becomes a disease. So that's something that's always debatable. Family members have a very hard time supporting their loved ones once they're into addiction because substance use, gambling, sex addictions, those are always, it's a choice to start it. And I think that's why people say it's a choice, you can stop. Well, yeah, it was a choice for them to start it, but it becomes an addiction. And once it becomes an addiction, it's hard to stop. So that's the hard part for people to really understand. But how I like to explain this to family members when they have a loved one suffering an addiction is that addiction, have you ever, so I like how you use the food example. So, like, have you ever had a craving of sugar? And we all have qualities to show what addiction looks like, right? So, if we use food, which is a more common one, sugar, it's a very common one, right? So, try to not have a sugar drink, right, throughout the day. Try your best to just drink water and not to drink anything sweet. See how that works for you. Or not, or matter of fact, don't have any sugar. Don't even put sugar in your coffee. Don't put sugar in anything. Don't have anything sweet and see how that works for you. Caffeine. Try your best not to have caffeine and see how that works for you. Right? So that is how you can start to understand the process of addiction and how it works on the body. And it really is the brain. And then it impacts other parts of that.
Like, awesome, awesome. And so, yeah, I love that you broke that down because a lot of people kind of say, just with anything with addiction, is just, hey, it's your choice or, hey, you started that. But just like the food, similar to trying a new restaurant and they got good tacos and they're the best tacos you ever had. So it's like, hey, this is my new restaurant. And now, every week you're going to eat tacos. Well, same thing with addiction, and I love that you use nicotine for one, is because, people have their first cigarette when they're young or out with their friends and drinking or whatever. Let me they always say, let me get a square or let me try one. And then all of a sudden now you're 40, 50 years old, been smoking 20, 30 years, and you're like, hey, I started when I was 15 and it was just a couple buddies just hanging out and they said, hey, you want to try this? And it's kind of the same similar circumstance. And I love that you broke it down like that. And so,
Yeah.
yeah.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to add, yes, you're right. It because it affects the brain's reward system. That's what I wanted to say. The part that controls the pleasure, the motivation, and the memory. Like once that's impacted and it's affected because you keep using something that is starting to formulate an addiction, that's what's happening. That is no longer like you are now manipulating what your pleasure is and your memory, right? So over time, the brain starts to crave the substance or that behavior that you've been doing. So it's very hard for you to have healthy relationships because now it starts impacting relationships. It starts impacting your personal goals. And that's how we define an addiction is anything that impacts your daily living. So someone can do, so let's use cigarettes since that's what you were talking about. Someone can smoke a cigarette and it may seem as if it's not an addiction, but it becomes an addiction if you're spending your last money to buy a square, right? If your family member is telling you that it's impacting them because of the smell, or health wise, the doctor is saying you got to stop. Your lungs are clogged up, right? Or your blood pressure is too high. That is the impact.
Awesome, awesome. I love that you broke it down like that. And so, with that being said, I'd love for you to go over, what's your greatest success story with the individual that you work with, and then tell the audience, what are some last minute tips, tricks, or any motivation or inspiration that you could give them.
Yeah, so I would say healing is possible, recovery is possible. We have to be patient with our loved ones. Throughout my career, it is a very frustrating field because there's so many people who relapse. What I've learned and what I've seen is that people who go back to their same environments that they left to get treatment and it's the same, usually have a higher chance of relapse. So, my most successful stories have been people who have gotten a fresh start but has been successful in treatment. So what success looks like in treatment is that they're buying into the program by learning something new. They're open to change. They want to change. And that's the biggest thing with addiction. People have to want to change. They can't really be. There have been success stories where people are forced, people are getting to incarceration because of a crime. And that's the thing with addiction. Addiction is not just you just have an addiction and then you're just this great citizen. Usually addiction comes with crime. It comes with domestic violence. It comes with these things that impacts your whole life in such strong ways. So my success stories have been people who have taken accountability, have used such programs as 12 steps or SMART, any self-help group to help them, who have worked on their personal lives and for trying to forgive themselves. Because a lot of times they start using to deal with other issues. So not really understanding how to deal with trauma they may have had. Sometimes people use because of peer pressure, because people around them is doing it, not understanding their own genetics. I like to use marijuana as an example when people can understand addiction, is that just because in some states marijuana is legal, but just because it's legal does not mean it's right for you. Same thing with alcohol. Just because alcohol is legal, we say it, but we don't say that about other substances. Just because you see someone drinking alcohol and it may appear that they're okay, it doesn't mean it's right for that person, because someone else can drink alcohol and have other issues. Or they may know, like, oh, I can't drink alcohol because I behave in this way. Same thing with marijuana. Some people, marijuana does not work for them. Marijuana makes them get stuck. Marijuana may have them hallucinate. That's another thing. Sometimes substances bring out mental illness. So we can go on and on. So success looks like the person wanting to do better. They want better. They understand why they got into the addiction. So that way, when they get back into the community that they came from, they know, okay, I got to avoid people, places, and things.
Awesome, awesome. Again, it's been a wonderful episode 11 here, speaking on addiction and, some powerful words of encouragement. And so I really just encourage everyone, really show your family members grace, especially those that are the parents or very close to the loved one with the addiction, and also show the person with addiction, that grace. And when I say grace, I mean that, I think everyone has some form of addiction, but we just don't realize that it's an addiction, like Katie was saying earlier, until you realize it starts affecting that daily life. And again, it's like with the brain and the reward system. And so, for example, real quick example, just simple as, going out on a weekend, if you miss one weekend of going out and it ruins your mood for Monday at work, hey, that's an addiction. Like, you don't have to go to the club every Saturday, every Friday night. And so that's just a quick example on that. And so again, really just want the people that are listening and viewing this episode really to understand that everything ends and begins with you. And as long as you are willing to finish the story and control your own destiny, again, like Katie said, you can overcome whatever addiction that is plaguing you, as long as you keep God first and really be convicted in healing from that addiction. And so really not just committed, because commitment, again, I've said it in other episodes, but a commitment is, hey, all my friends are going to the gym and I'm fat, so I'm going to go with them so I can be like them. Again, that's the reward system and that mentality of that self-approval and that self-gratification. But if you're convicted and say, hey, if they block my number and move out of state and I never see them again, I'm still going to go to the gym and hit my goal because I want to be better for myself. And so just always focus on conviction. And so with that said, Katie, one last motivational quote from you that you would give the audience, and tell the audience where they can find you.
Yes, thank you. My last motivation thing is, you wrapped it up. You did a really good job. So I'm just going to add to, you are your own worst critic, so you know what you need and what you want. So dig in and try to be better than you are. every day. You start somewhere, right? And it can be a little bit at a time. And so I say that to start with emotions, right? We all have to dig into what we're feeling. A lot of people who do suffer with addictions, they avoid to feel. Some people don't know how to feel because of how we were brought up and not being acknowledging. So that's important. So one of the things that I did to give back to the clients that I work with is engaging with the youth. So I wrote a children's book on emotions because I found that the many adults that I work with and people who suffer with substance use disorder and other things such as trauma is that they have a very hard time identifying their emotions, identifying emotions before it gets to things such as anger, understanding what irritability is like, frustration, discrimination that people deal with. So I decided to write a book so kids can learn early on. It's a poetry story and it's a superhero story about two boys who learn that their superpower is within them, and that superpower is their ability to identify their own emotions. So you can find me. I have a website. It's www.Ade Self-Care.
Awesome, awesome. And so again, appreciate everyone for joining us on this wonderful episode 11 of season 2 of the Darklaw Dominion Mental Health series. Again, it all ends and begins with you, and you have the power to decree the darkest part of your mind to take hold and have dominion and reveal the true light that shines. This has been Dominion and Miss Katie from the New Jersey, the wonderful state of New Jersey. Again, go ahead, break that addiction and start healing. And this has been the both of us. We're signing off and hope everyone has a great rest of their week. And we'll see you next time on Decree Dominion. Thank you.
Thank you for joining me on this journey into the depths of Darklaw Dominion. Remember, it's in the darkest parts of ourselves that we often find the greatest strength. Facing that darkness is not a sign of weakness, it's the path to healing, growth, and reclaiming control of your life. If this series resonates with you, or if you're looking for more empowering stories on healing and reclaiming your power, make sure to follow Decree of Dominion on Facebook, Spotify, and YouTube. There, we continue the conversation on mental health, domestic violence, and relationships, offering hope and support. Until next time, keep exploring the shadows, keep seeking your truth, and keep fighting for your light.